Right. Thank you all so much for joining this. Wish you a very happy New Year. Hope you had some time to relax, to enjoy your holidays in the festivity periods. And as we draw closer to Jan 17th, we at Thomas Murray have dedicated this full month for DORA related webinars. First of which is TLPT. I am your host, Shreeji Doshi. I'm a director within the cyber risk practice of Thomas Murray. And I have with me two very competent red teamers and technical testers, Ben and Hassan. Ben, would you like to go and give a short introduction?
Sure. Afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year as well. My name is Ben Hawkins. I've worked in almost every department cyber has to offer. So I've been in incident response, a forensic investigator. I've worked in SOCs and blue teams. I have done e-discovery and legal work. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been focused entirely on sort of threat simulation, proactive testing, red teaming, etc. Before all this, I was actually in financial services myself. So I've seen the game play from both sides.
Thanks, Ben. Hassan?
Hey, I'm Hassan Mahmud. My specialty is red teaming and prior to this pen testing, been doing it for the past 5 years or so. Prior to that, I was sysadmin, so I've seen the flip side of these tests as well as fixing and remediating those issues.
Yeah. Thanks, Hassan and Ben. We for this session, we would want to cover aspects around TLPT. This session is recorded. This session will also be shared afterwards. The slides also will be shared after the sessions. Feel free to ask your questions. Feel free to post questions. Use the chat functionalities. There'll be few polls thrown into the mix during these sessions to gather some insights from you all. So please participate. It will make the session more interactive. And I will be monitoring chats and questions and be redirecting it to Ben and Hassan accordingly. Before we get going on the agenda for today, just to get a bit of idea of the demographics, we just want to understand which part of the world you are from a DORA applicability point of view. Please do provide updates on the location, your primary location where you are. You would see polls coming in. We have people from Bulgaria who have joined in. Others, Romania, makes Latvia. A lot of people from non-EU countries. It's great. Hopefully you are part of DORA compliance team or are interested in further understanding on how you could adopt DORA within your organization. So we do have people from Netherlands, from Romania, Latvia, Germany, France. Great representation. Thank you all so much for providing your insights. The second poll before we get going is to better understand what kind of industry or subsector of financial services your organization is in, one of the primaries. Now, this is not the full scope of DORA. There is limited set of subsectors that we factored in that is purely based on the TLPT applicability where there is clarity. So that is one of the reasons for conducting this poll. Again, the poll is available for you to provide us information about. So we have payment institution CSDs, which is trade insurers, trading venues, a lot of lot of entities, not from any of these others. So 26. Good representation, Ben and Hassan, we have here. So let's make this session more interesting. Thank you all so much for providing this inputs on the poll. We move along. So the session for today, background and context. Here we're not going to spend a lot of time. I think we are all aware of the background of DORA so far. Then we'll get to what is TLPT. We'll try to simplify TLPT's understanding for non-technical people. Also, what does it mean to conduct a TLPT under DORA? Which would include explaining on how the scoping of TLPT applicability works. We then synthesize the TLPT output for non-technical team members and senior management so that they know what they're looking at and how they should interpret it. We'll share some insights from our experience, Hassan's and Ben's experience of doing TLPT or red teaming, and our final key takeaways. So I'll jump right straight into the content. Again, we know why DORA has been there. Next week, it is coming into effect. And almost entire financial service industry is impacted with this. However, for TLPT, there is a limited scope, which we'll cover further down the line. Ben, you want to share further insights on TLPT in DORA?
Yeah, thanks, Shreeji. So what we're looking at here is kind of DORA broken down into its four major categories that are relevant for financial service entities. The one we're specifically looking at today is digital operational resilience testing, because that's where the TLPT piece sits. Can we move to the next slide, Shreeji? So within that, there's actually four different categories: general requirements, testing of ICT tools, advanced testing, and requirements for testers. Obviously, the last two mention TLPT by name, so those are important for our purposes here. Given that we are testers and most of the people on the call are going to be clients, we're obviously going to focus on the third piece, the advanced testing. Let's move on, Shreeji. So within here, in the regulations, we've picked out 9 points that we believe to be kind of the most salient pieces as far as implementing TLPT testing. So if we move on, Shreeji. Yeah, okay. So point one is that we have to do these tests every 3 years at a bare minimum. So can do it every 2 years or every 1 year should appetite allow, but 3 years is at a complete minimum as per the regulations. It's going to have to cover several of your critical business functions defined by yourselves, not by the regulator. So that's an exercise that needs to happen internally. We'll cover that in a little bit. It's all done on live environments. So there's lots of security testing that happens within development environments, staging environments, etc. This is very much on live environments to ensure that there aren't any oddities with the implementation of the development or staging environments that would not be applicable to the live environments. That's very important. Third-party systems are considered in scope, so that there's a lot of complexity around this in DORA itself. Ultimately, the third parties are obliged to be part of the TLPT, with the note that if it causes detriment to the ability of the third party to provide their services to other people, then they do have an opt-out feature there. There is the option also of pool testing. So if lots of people rely on the same third party, that third party can do pooled testing in which the financial entities operate within that TLPT of the third party itself. So there's a bit of nuance around that, but that will come to bear later. Risk management, very important. So, the whole thing we're doing is focused on operational resiliency. So making sure that we have risk management strategies in place to ensure that not only threats, but also TLPT doesn't cause issues to the financial entity and the underlying infrastructure. Obviously critically important to make sure that kind of stuff is in place, policies, procedures, and so on, how to deal with downtime and so on. There's a lot of documentation that needs to go back and forth to the authorities, testing plans, remediation plans, all this kind of stuff, detailed contracts needs to go through to authorities. So there's going to be lots of channels open for those types of things. One interesting stipulation is the requirement to use external testers. So people like Thomas Murray, once every 3 tests at a minimum. So, if you're doing it every 3 years, then that's every 9 years, you've got to involve an external entity. With the caveat that if you are in fact a credit institution and are classified as a significant entity, then you have to use external testers every time. There's no option for internal testing there. The 8th point is that there is further definition required for the standards for scoping, testing, and remediation for TLPT, so that will come along in time. As with all things DORA, seemingly it's a moving set of goalposts, so we can only acknowledge and kind of keep up with those changes as they come. And number 9, of course, with everything DORA, defined by proportionality. So the requirements around TLPT are not immune to those proportionality principles. It is all applied based on size of organization, importance of organization, criticality in the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of it difficult to define in terms of that, but we'll cover that off in a later slide. Thanks, Shreeji.
Super. Ben, just to kind of, there is a lot of similarity with TBER EU, and that is something that you'll also cover further down the slides.
Yeah, as far as anyone is concerned, they are identical, which is really helpful because that's been an implemented standard for a while.
Brilliant. So, one more poll question. Has your organization conducted TLPT? What I've extended is the definition of TLPT, like this is very specific to DORA, where this terminology has been used. There are other similar terms used for something similar, which is like a red team or a purple team exercise, and hence a broader definition. So is that something that organizations have currently used? If we can get poll in, we do have an interesting mix of responses. We have around 40% indicating, 17 now indicating no, never, say what. Willant, yes, once or twice, 30% indicating yes, they've done it, which is great. We'll just give it last 5 seconds for anyone just to input. If not, right. So we do have organizations, Ben, that have never done it, Hassan, also, or they don't understand the terminology. So what I would suggest is during the course, if you could also provide more insights on what is TLPT, let's kind of break it down, which definitely we're going to cover, but let's try to focus on that. And for organizations that have done this already, hopefully there are some more insights from our experience that we are able to share, which will provide some more further clarity going down the line. So let's dive straight into TLPT for organizations who have not done it, or it's the term that they are seeing first time referenced. Ben.
Yeah, good that some people don't know what it is or have never done it. Otherwise, this next section is somewhat redundant. A question we get asked relatively often is, what is the difference between a vulnerability assessment, a penetration test, and a TLPT, red team, purple team? Because the terms themselves are a little vague. So here we've tried to define exactly what each of them is and the kind of values that you pull from them. A vulnerability assessment, your kind of off-the-shelf VA, is going to be generally run by a tool, so just an off-the-shelf tool pointed at infrastructure, and what you get out the back is a bunch of findings that may or may not be accurate, but they give you a list of defects to work through and things to identify. It has its value and it has its place in terms of an ability for it to produce a defect list as part of your kind of routine security checks, but it's fairly unsophisticated. So it's the kind of thing that can be run by pretty much anyone with a tool, send it at a environment or an infrastructure, and then you get answers out the back. Simple, but effective for what it is. The next sort of rung up from a VA, if you like, is a penetration test. So it sort of does what it says on the tin. It's a bit more penetrative in its nature and a bit more invasive. And the idea here is to pull more information about specific weaknesses in applications, in infrastructure, but validate those weaknesses, perhaps exploit those weaknesses to demonstrate the risk to the organization. In some cases, you're going to chain multiple vulnerabilities together to kind of create a so-called kill chain. But it's relatively undirected. So you're looking at an environment, okay, albeit a smaller part of an environment than perhaps a VA, but you're not necessarily going after a particular target. You're kind of looking at the whole environment as a whole, and then trying to pull insights out of that. It does require a bit more skill to operate penetration testing tools, because it's not just an automated process; it's very manual. So you do need those kind of slightly more skilled testers to operate a PT. But one thing that is interesting about a penetration test and a vulnerability assessment is that when you're looking at an environment in one of those two exercises, each of the servers and computers and pieces of infrastructure and so on is sort of quantized. So it's an individual piece. So you're saying, what are the vulnerabilities for this machine? What are the vulnerabilities for this server? What are the vulnerabilities for this computer? And you don't necessarily get a sense of the overall risk of the environment and the infrastructure itself. It's one of the places where a TLPT does really shine. So TLPT at its heart is a real world simulation of an attack that could happen to you. And the reason for doing that is its preparation, right? It's all very well doing this hypothetical exercise and saying, where are our vulnerabilities? But if we're looking at what could actually happen to us, then that's a much more realistic thing to try and defend against in the future. It's very targeted. So it's looking at really specific pieces of your infrastructure, saying, the financial systems are the ones that are kind of crown jewels. This is the worst bit that could be compromised. So that's the bit we try and target in a TLPT to really see how an attacker could get to those crown jewels. It's all very well and good if they can get to the intern's laptop, but if that doesn't mean anything, that's not interesting to you. So the whole idea is that it's far more targeted, and it's targeted by performing sort of intelligence gathering prior to the exercise, which we'll cover in a minute, that gives some direction to the testers and the end client, you guys, to kind of refine that targeting piece. Out the back, you get this, deep strategic guidance on security posture, on remediation, on potential attack vectors. It's much more of an in-depth health check rather than a kind of a quick and dirty exercise like a vulnerability assessment. Ultimately, they exist on a scale. Threat-led pen testing is at one end and VA is at the other. But that kind of explains what the complexities are and, of course, the price differences are. One thing we will repeatedly kind of come back to and harp on about is TLPT is an incredibly valuable exercise, regardless of the fact that it's in DORA and it's part of the compliance framework and all that kind of stuff. It's so valuable as an exercise that we'd recommend anybody with even a moderate level of cybersecurity maturity to perform this exercise to some degree, because it provides so much insight. Obviously we're biased because we're providing the service, but it is genuinely an incredible way of preventing future compromise or preparing for it at least. Thanks, Shreeji.
Thanks, Ben. Just a note, if what is TLPT? What does red team mean? If you still have questions, pop it on the chat. I'm monitoring it. And we'll try to answer as much as we could. We referred to TBER EU before. Ben, you want to first explain a bit what TBER EU is, also for people?
Yeah, so it's effectively the same thing we're talking about, because the two have been intentionally aligned. It's a framework for performing these kind of activities and the reports that come out the back. And it's been a good framework, and people have appreciated its advantages, and that's why it's been so directly brought into DORA. They are one and the same as far as anything important matters.
Yeah. And TPU was a framework, I think, that was introduced a few years ago, more specifically in the context of credit institution or banks. where the banks were subjected to T-BER EU framework, which has been adopted by multiple member states. I think significant number of member states now. I don't know which have not yet adopted that. And based on that, it was also a regulatory exercise of something very similar as TLPT has been highlighted. So something like this has always been in practice, mostly focused at banks, but now with DORA it comes in a wider set of subsectors within the financial service industry.
Yeah, but it's a very sensible framework and good for lobbying really against any organization.
Yep.
Do we want to snap back one slide, Shreeji? So just quickly to wrap through some benefits, because again, we're going to harp on about it being a good exercise regardless. The fact that it's repeatable and it has been done across multiple organizations and institutions already, that consistency is helpful when comparing either organizations or year on year or indeed subsidiaries. That repeatability and the standardization of the testing is really critical there. The fact that it's realistic is really important. It kind of ties into a later point, but simulating these threats is good for the organization to get insights, but also for the blue teams and SOC teams to get practiced. Look at their live environment and see what actually pings off when an attack starts. It's a useful exercise from their perspective too. It's accurate because it's going after your crown jewels, your critical systems. So you get insights that are valid and insights that are actually useful. Like I say, provides practice there. Actionable in terms of the reports very well should contain insights that are implementable straight away, both on an individual asset basis, but on an organizational basis too. Making sure that things like processes and procedures and policies are in place to detect actions that are done within the environment. It should give you some degree of confidence. This is a gold star activity for a reason. It really does lower threat risk, and you should feel the same level of confidence that it provides insights. To a degree, it future-proofs you because you're getting ahead of real-world attacks. You're looking at who are the real attackers, what are they doing, how are they doing it, and then preparing your organization for those attacks. So it isn't in a sense future-proofing. And of course, with DORA, it does meet those regulations. So critical from that perspective too.
Yep. Super.
So anatomy of the TLPT. We've simplified as much as possible here because DORA does break it down quite a lot. But it ultimately comes down to these 5 categories: scoping, planning, as you'd expect for any sort of cybersecurity engagement, defining objectives, scope, timescales, etc. The caveat here is, of course, the objective is very specific to the organization. Each organization's target will be different. Then there's this intelligence gathering phase, which we'll talk about in a second, where we, as a provider, we go away and look at who's attacking who and where and all this sort of stuff. Again, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But to kind of build a picture of who's attacking your who could be attacking your organization at least. And then really important piece is we start to build these scenarios. So we sort of say, right, we're going to simulate attacker X using tool Y and procedure Z, and this is how we're going to get in, and this is how we're going to attack the organization. This is done very much in concert with the client. So, you might put up some scenarios, we might put up some, and then we kind of define which are the scenarios you'd like to run with, generally sort of 3+, but can be fewer. And one of those, I believe, is allowed to be completely speculative. So can be based on what a CTI or cyber threats intelligence provider believes will happen in the future, not necessarily what is happening now. And that's to kind of, again, future-proof the engagement. Then there's the all-important execution, where we go and do our job, break things and move around the environment and figure out how to get to the crown jewels. And then, of course, the most important bit, the bit we're really paying for all this about, is the documentation of those findings. What was done, when was it done critically, because you want to be able to compare detections to actions and make sure that all your systems are alerting correctly based on when an attack takes place. And that sort of then feeds back into the scoping planning for the next engagement. What went well, what didn't, defining new scenarios, etc. So that's kind of a cyclical 5-stage piece of a threat-led pen test. So the next thing we'll talk about is the intelligence gathering piece. So this is a screenshot, albeit very small, I appreciate, of our in-house CTI system. So around it are the kind of things we're ingesting. So who's attacking? What are the threat actors that are attacking? Who's being attacked? So organizations that have had active compromises. What techniques do attackers use to get into these organizations? Are they social engineering? Are they doing purely technical break-ins? Are they physically breaking into buildings? Those kind of things. What tools do attackers use? So, off-the-shelf tools, custom tools, whatever. How are those attacks connected? So maybe it's one tool being developed that is asserting multiple threat actors, or maybe one tool is being used very much in a specific industry, and that then begins to build a picture of how an attacker might attack your specific organization. What sectors are being targeted? So obviously we're talking about financial services here mostly, and insurance indeed. But the specific sector you're in does matter a great deal, and CTI is generic. So, you're much more likely to be attacked if you're in financial services than if you're in a boutique clothes store, one-off. They're just very different targets in terms of, financial gain, political gain, etc. So that's really important for our general CTI purposes. And then what have our incident responders seen? So this is a really important piece where there's a feedback loop between what our people are seeing on the ground and what's fed back into our system, so that we can more accurately represent a real threat in your environment, because we can do it based on what has actually happened. Thank you, Shreeji. Back to you.
Thanks, Ben. But I think what you mentioned in the last point is for me significantly important, because that is where you get significant reality of sorts of the cyber attacks. So it's not just speculative; it's based on actual looking at incidents also. So it does make sense. We move on to the next question. Poll question. Do you know if you're in scope of TLPT and the DORA? Are you already aware? For the people who have joined, or that is something which is unknown, or you definitely believe? Okay, last few seconds in. We do have people who are sure that they are not in scope of DORA. Okay, yeah, and there are people who are sure they are in, which is great, and there are unsures. Pet, do you want to, say on for people who are in scope of DORA, how do they prepare, and how do they go about determining whether they're in scope or not?
Yeah, the second piece is an interesting question. Let's cover the first piece first. So if you are indeed in scope for TLPT, there are several things that need to be done before the whole exercise begins to make it all a bit slicker and easier. Number one is identifying those critical systems we talked about before. So the targets of the exercise, identifying, which are the systems that are most critical to the organization's running, most interconnected, so that it can't be, that if it goes down, then everything else goes down. It could be something that's not easily replaceable. All these kind of things tie into what you determine to be your kind of critical systems. And that is entirely a decision driven by the organization, not by the regulator. So it's an important one to get right prior to the exercise. Then the next piece is on this resiliency piece again. Is preparing those continuity plans and processes. Obviously, TLPT should never have an impact on your ability to run your organization. But given that it is simulating a real threat, and the real threat may come along at any point, those continuity plans and processes are really important to make sure that there is resiliency built into the systems that are being tested, and to ensure that the business can continue operating in the face of a real world attack. And indeed, to make sure that the TLPT process goes smoothly. From a regulatory perspective, we alluded earlier to some documentation that needs to go back and forward. Testing plans, methodologies, and so on need to be submitted to the regulators and competent authorities, and need to be approved, as do the testing processes and the processes by which remediations are implemented, and the criticality of findings in the kind of post-report world. But those avenues of communication should be open prior to the implementation of the TLPT exercise, to ensure that everything kind of flows smoothly and you get this nice ability to just focus on the remediation as opposed to the red tape of it all. So the next question that Shreeji asked is, how do you tell if you're in scope? And it's a doozy. So generally, a yes is a yes. So if you are in scope, it's pretty well defined. So, sorry, I should say the other way around. If you are an organization who is identified as being in scope, then it's a yes. If it's a no, it's a bit more flexible. A no is a maybe. So there are some cases here, I'm going to flick through this a little bit because it's a long flow chart, but this is kind of, this deck is going out, so you can flick through it yourself later. But for example here, if you're a credit institution and defined as a GSII, then you are definitely in scope. End of conversation. Slight caveat with proportionality, but generally yes. Payment institution, and you have 2 years where you have more than 150 billion euros of transactions, it's a yes. Everything else is a no asterisk. It comes down to the criticality of the organization in the jurisdiction that it operates in, the interconnectedness of entities, the importance of the organization in terms of political stance. All this kind of stuff can be brought in by the competent authorities to kind of enforce TLPT on entities. So all this to say, if you're a no, it could be a no, but it could also be a yes. So again, we're going to harp on about engaging with the TLPT process, even if you don't think you need to do it. Obviously, with the massive asterisk of proportionality, if it's not relevant and it's not, it's overkill for your organization, then I think that's defensible. Can we flick through to the next slide, Shreeji? So just further down here, you can see more that are definite yeses, and we'll keep going. The trading venue one is nice and complicated. Detail there to be read at a further time. Next slide, Shreeji. And again, more yeses, one no. And then if you're not any of the 7 entities that were, entity types that were identified in the second question, poll question, then you are again likely not in scope of TLPT. It's quite a specific and directed piece of the legislation. If we go to the next slide, Shreeji, I'd anticipate this will be very difficult to read on a WebEx call, but when you receive the deck, this is just a one screen snapshot of that flowchart to help identify who is in scope and who is not. In my mind, it's a little easier to read than the block text from DORA, so that's why we produced this slide. I will hand back to you, Shreeji.
Yep. Just a note on this, on the organizations that are likely not to be in scope for TLPT, there's a level 2 text available where they've provided with the competent authorities list of risk parameters that will help them determine whether an entity should be in scope of TLPT or not. And they are pretty broad, which means that the competent authority has a lot of leeway to bring any entity under the scope of TLPT, but that would depend on a lot of factors as to, what's their capacity like, do they have adequate resources to run a TLPT, etc., etc., etc. And from whatever we've heard so far, from a supervisory action point of view, most of the individual competent authorities will likely focus on in-scope TLPT for sure in year 1. So that's basically the steer so far, and it's an indicative steer. Second guessing it, but that is what we see the winds to be blowing.
It's great.
Thanks, Matt.
Yes.
Hassan, anything more for you to add on what Ben has discussed so far?
No, not much more.
Brilliant. Super. Moving on, how do we interpret a TLPT report?
So pretty much during the TLPT engagement, you're going to have a number of reports flowing, but the most important one will be the final report. The final report will have a number of sections. We've listed those on the screen now. I'll walk through those. but pretty much it's going to have different sections that are tailored to different groups or individuals within the organization or the regulatory body. The executive summary is going to be the high level review of the engagement, positives, negatives, thematic issues that the testers would have seen during the test. Usually this section's going to C-suite, board members or management. And it's a very useful section to understand the organization's security posture. The next section may be a technical findings section, and that's usually a lot of detail on the actual specific vulnerabilities identified during the engagement. We do have an example we'll go through later on in this section. But within the technical findings, you might also find the risk analysis of it might be combined within the technical findings section. The aim is to explain why the vulnerability is an issue for the organization. Why can an attacker abuse it? And even when an attacker does, how does that affect the organization? Can they lose data? Is it going to be a knock-on effect to a system taking it down, for example? The strategic advice section aims to provide the tactical remediation. And it's basically telling you how to deal with the issue that's identified, but it's also going on to how can the business avoid that root cause or other similar vulnerabilities in the organization. The rollback section is usually a list of indicators of compromise. So you'll hear that term quite a lot during the engagement, but it's pretty much a list of things that can be identified in the organization's systems that may have been changed, artifacts that have been left, and these can be later investigated by the blue team or the IT team and removed accordingly, because we don't want any artifacts left over from the testing for potentially another attacker to use, which we've seen. But finally, the methodology section is a section that's going to be information regarding how the testing has occurred and the finding classification mechanism. And usually the finding classification is based upon the combination of likelihood, expectation, impact of the vulnerability, how easy it is to remediate the vulnerability. Usually this can be switched out for an organization's own risk assessment framework, so it can be directly applicable, and that's something competent testing organizations will allow you to do. If we move on, we can go through an example finding. So this is an example from one of our red teams. The specific content doesn't matter in this example, but you can see that it's a critical vulnerability that allows all the organization systems to be compromised and complete control gained. So if we go next, you'll see it starts off with the finding ID and title. That's usually a unique identifier, and you'll see that reference potentially elsewhere in the report or even the remediation plan. So sometimes you'll see it in the report where it's been referenced as a chain of vulnerabilities to be taking down a system, or finding out what's going to happen with that finding and when it needs to be remediated. The next section will show you the finding rating. If we switch down, and basically that's going to tell you the identification of vulnerability, if it's a high, medium, critical. This can help you prioritize the remediation efforts. So if you need to figure out what should be addressed first, or what we can wait to address in 3 to 6 months' time, and then this is usually a standardized rating, and it should give you some idea when prioritizing those remediation plans. The next section is you'll sometimes see this in reports. It's a MITRE identification, and it's basically giving us an idea of what this finding has been used by other attackers. So MITRE is a standardized framework for organization and defenders, so blue team, to figure out how well they are detecting at these vulnerabilities or protecting against them. And The ID is a nice way of tracking what's happened within the test, as well as you'll see that MITRE ID and some TTPs within the CTI report. The next section is a description. So this is usually a comprehensive explanation of the identified vulnerability, and it will have the overview, technical details, impact, evidence, root cause, depending on the vulnerability itself. And sometimes you'll see a walkthrough on how to carry out that same exploitation for either the blue team or the IT team to go back and test. The next part of that finding would be remediation. So that's how the IT team can change and fix that vulnerability, or change the systems to make sure that vulnerability doesn't exist anymore. It's going. Usually, we like to have, as I said, the strategic advice is we like to have findings and the remediation to state what should be the immediate cause of action, and how that should be immediately resolved, and then go on to longer term issues. So it might be that processes need to be put into place to change and stop the root cause of that vulnerability. The next section would be the affected assets. So that's just the detailed list of what assets in the organization might be affected. Sometimes that can be a very long list, or sometimes it can just be a specific issue or system. And then the final section you see in our TM reports is how the SOC was able to detect or analyze and respond during the testing. So this is kind of the comments from the tester and the debrief that occurred after testing. Usually that's a good insight for management team and SOC team, the security teams, to start looking at improving or validating the detection capability for this specific vulnerability. Thanks, Shreeji. So essentially, once we have these findings, what do you do with them? If we go next, Shreeji, that this is pretty much what questions need to be asked, what teams need to be involved, and what do we do with that information once we have it. So you should be looking at the findings individually to create your remediation plan, and then look at them entirely to see how it affects the organization. But you'll be trying to figure out what the risk of the business is. You'll be trying to figure out, is this a compliance issue or a regulation issue? Does it need to be reported to the regulator, for example? And then the teams you'll have is the senior management teams and risk teams. Those are the teams that will be deciding if it's within risk appetite or how we should be dealing with that issue. The technical teams will be hopefully collaborating with the senior management teams to identify fixes, and if something can be fixed with a lower cost than anticipated. You will also have the TLPT partners. They should always be a key team involved. You can always ask them questions. If they don't want to answer any questions, then it's not great. Ideally, we like to collaborate as much with our clients, just because we have the information and they're going to want more of that as much as possible. So the value of the engagement can be taken in its full. And then you have the regulator. The regulator will be involved in this process a lot, because they are going to oversee, tick off, and help you during that. Help you to a certain extent, I should say. But then you also have the output of this engagement, which will be a remediation plan and a roadmap, deciding what's clear, what's actionable, what needs to be done first, last.
Super, Hassan. Hassan, just a quick question here from my side. This is the regulated TLPT that is under the scope of DORA. Now, if an organization wants to undertake that is not a regulated TLPT, but just want to prepare for a regulated TLPT once, which of these teams should be involved in that case?
So again, all the same teams will be in place, apart from the regulator in this case. You'd expect exactly the same kind of setup, just have a little bit less oversight.
In this, understood. And prior to getting to the reporting phase, what's your suggestions and recommendation on the threat intelligence part of it? Because that's a fairly integral part of the TLPT exercise and scenario development and the testing methodology plan development, which needs to be shared with the regulator. So what would you kind of provide as an input on that?
So the good thing about TLPT is that the organization is in a lot of control compared to TIBA EU testing. TIBA and CBEST testing is very prescriptive. It's very much, you must do it this way. From my understanding of TLPT, you are able to provide justifications for having a few changes in that. So one big thing is making sure the TLPT partner and CTI team are working together, are understanding that information, and it's not just a list of issues or scenario, how the scenario will play out. Both teams need to be communicating. That's the biggest thing I've seen.
Right. Super. Thanks. Ben, from your side, anything more to add on this?
That's good for me.
Yeah. A quick question again. The last poll of the day. Do you have something planned already for 2025? Is it because you believe you would be under the regulation and you would do it when the regulator will ask for it, or you're going to do it as part of preparation for your regulatory TLPT more proactively? So not just TLPT, or it could be just proactively. You're not sure or definite no? Give few more seconds for people to respond to. We've seen mostly it's people providing as part of regulation. So if the regulator is going to ask for it, they're going to undertake. There are a few unknowns, which does make sense. A very interesting observation, I believe, Ben. No one will do it in preparation for a TLPT, or even proactively TLPT or red team, at least in the audience that we have. I think you've made a point earlier about proactively doing TLPT, not just for compliance but more for proactive risk management. What are your thoughts?
There's shifting sands, right? So this is as red teaming was a little while ago. TLPT is a kind of new concept. It's not something that people have thought about. But increasingly, the winds are pushing towards this being more and more an expected piece of testing for a sufficiently mature organization. Clients will start expecting it. Regulators, indeed, investors will start expecting it. It's just going to become part of the landscape. So it's again, we'd encourage it because it's a valuable exercise. You can be ahead of the curve. You can understand it, how it works prior to being forced to do it. It's ultimately the way. But again, I think it goes to the point of cybersecurity is increasingly an expectation of the kind of previously mentioned groups. So worth doing in our mind.
Yeah. Okay. I think there is a key takeaway also on it, and we possibly come back on this point again in our closing. Moving on, as we have 10 minutes. Hassan, do you want to share insights on your experience of performing such an exercise for organizations? I think one of the organization was indeed a bank, a significantly large bank.
Yeah, we've done testing for organizations that are outside of the TIBA EU scope as well. And then in this case, this specific bank, they were very mature and needed some sort of testing that would test their systems entirely. The problems that do come across when you are doing kind of TLPT in generic and organizations we've seen across the board is kind of a lot of the more mature organizations will have CTI teams internally or CTI data coming in. And making sure you understand that data and applying it to the organization to ensure you're improving the organization's situation awareness is not always carried out correctly or well. So that's one of the annoying things, and having an external partner can always help in that. The TLPT is very resource intensive, and you will probably end up diverting some personnel and time, and you may get a knock-on effect with some users. The next part is the target identification. So as Ben mentioned, understanding your assets and ensuring you have carried out business impact analysis within the organization. The red team will be better placed to selecting those goals, or the organization will be better placed to selecting those goals for the red team to attack. And then finally, testing is very complex. We will be testing in a live environment, and although the way we like to work is we like to involve the client as much as possible, the unintended disruptions are always possible. So it's one of the risks and questions we get asked is how we try to deal with that. And again, it's a slow process, and we're stepping forward to that.
Yep. And I think target identification is something which depends on a lot of things, your CTIs, your critical and important functions, which Ben was also alluded in the beginning, and it depends on how mature the organization have all of these, bringing all of it together. So indeed, Hassan, kind of resonate to what you are saying of this. Eventually, for that specific bank, what do you think were the drivers for going for something like this, which was under a regulation?
Yeah, I mean, for them, the primary driver was testing their entire security function. TLPT and Red Team is usually done with not everyone involved, with only a few key stakeholders involved. So you get to test your incident response process. If the attackers, in this case us, are detected, organizations should be going through the standard process until someone steps in to say, no, don't worry, this is a test. So you get a very good overview of your organization's security posture.
Super. Thanks for your insight, Hassan. We move on to our key takeaways. 5 minutes remaining on the slide. I'll let you share your key takeaways. Ben, I will let you share your key takeaways.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go through these very quick, just in case there are any other questions. And but essentially, the first step is to determine if your organization falls under TLPT DORA. And for a lot, that will be a simple yes, and for others, it will be no. But it's very much dependent on the regulator and them coming in to decide that for you. However, doing TLPT, even if you're not part of the required by regulation, is always a good shout. It's a very much for mature organizations, and it tests, as I said, the entire process. Then the next is partnering up with a trusted third party. It helps you simplify the TLPT process, the testing, the actual compliance, and the remediation. And having that partner ensures that your testing and the organization of your organization, the understanding of your organization is taken into consideration. TLPT, the reports that will come out, the reports and the insights that will come out of it be amazing for both management and technical teams. It's a lot of information, but you need to make sure you need to work with your TLPT provider to ensure you extract the necessary value from that report, from that information, from their knowledge as well. And then TLPT should be used as a valuable tool. It's not just a tick box exercise that has to be done. Even if it's not required, we should be considering implementing it and doing TLPT as an organization, even if it's not to that certain extent. TLPT can come in many forms as well, as we've said. Well, there's red team, there's purple teaming, there's involving more people from the organization or involving less, depending on what your maturity is and what you're trying to test. And again, I think someone asked a question about achieving it. If an objective is achieved quickly, what happens? It depends on the actual test. In some cases, we've gained access within a day, and it's a very quick test. However, sometimes we all struggle to find something over the months of testing. So it's very much deciding. Some organizations, testers might need a leg up. They might need help accessing the network. So there's ways to extract value from the testing, and that needs to be designed within the scope of that engagement. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Hassan. Ben, from your point of view, any closing remarks?
No, I think Hassan covered everything. The only thing I would say is that on the partnering up piece, DORA has its own, of course it does, regulations around internal testing, policies, procedures, and how we manage internal testers and train them and all this kind of stuff. So just be aware if the plan is to go with internal testers, that there are requirements around those people who conduct those tests.
Yep. Good point, Ben. From my point of view, I think the objective for this was to bring TLPT to a lot wider audience, not just technical teams. That was one of the objectives of this. And we do encourage organizations to undertake any form of TLPT, red team, purple team. If you are going to be in the regulation from a TLPT point of view and have not done such an exercise before, it's worth doing preparation before. As Hassan mentioned, in our experience, we Hassan and Ben have been able to breach organizations on day one of the exercise. If that happens in a regulated exercise, it opens a Pandora's box, because the regulator will ask a lot more questions to you. So it's better to be prepared if you are in scope of a regulated TLPT, for sure. With that, I think we've answered all the questions, but Ben, Hassan, have you seen the chat? Anything more to add than what has been shared so far?
No, I think everything's been answered in the chat. If you snap to the next slide, Shreeji, I think we have an email address in there.
Yeah.
Obviously, one more, I think, actually.
Yeah. But if you have questions, do reach out to us. This is a series. Today was TLPT. Next week, we're going to cover what we encourage organizations to do in short term from a DORA compliance point of view. As we get to Jan 17 deadline, we have two other lined up, one on incident response and the other on TPRM. You would hear from us a lot. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. As indicated, the slides will be shared, the recording would be made available. If you have any questions, do reach out. And until next week, wish you already a very good weekend. Thank you so much for joining.